plants and put a fence if you wanted to. This is procedural stuff that we should have cleaned up if we just missed it over the years. So, doesn't make a lot of sense. I found Lawrence. They were missing you. They hadn't seen you so long. I said, I found you. She still works here.
I was like, I didn't know you were missing.
Someone asked, Lauren hasn't been in front of the board in a while. So we're behind her out back. So she's ready to go now. A lengthy transition. What's that? I jeans on my
The chair will call the HOAB meeting for December to order. Roll call at the moment, we are missing Joe Klutz, we're missing Scott Harrington. We do have 5. All right. We need to approve the minutes from July 11th, please. Is there a motion? I have a motion.
A second.
And a second. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes, raise your hand. It's unanimous. We do not have public comments, I believe. Okay. And we are headed right into our action agenda for text amendment 2416, an amendment to the zoning ordinance, Article 11.4.3D and Article 7.4.2G, and the subdivision ordinance, Section 6.320, comma 3, and Section 6.300, comma 1, comma N, regarding community meeting requirements, existing feature requirements, and berm requirements. Thank you. Hey.
Good afternoon. So Lauren Spate versus staff. TA 24-16 is a text amendment composed of 5 parts submitted by the planning department. And after each part, I'll pause for any questions to hopefully help a bit, because some of the sections are about completely different topics. So Section 1 is with regard to community meeting requirements for CD rezonings. So one of the purposes of this proposed section of the text amendment is to make the community meeting scheduling requirements for CD rezonings and major subdivisions consistent, specifically with regard to the night in which applicants are allowed to schedule these meetings. So currently, for CD rezoning applications, they can be held on any night. So staff is proposing that it's required that community meetings shall not be held on Town of Huntersville Board of Commissioners or Planning Board meeting nights. This would help to avoid conflicts for staff and any board members that would like to attend these meetings. Any questions with this proposal? Okay. Section 2, a little bit more involved. This is with regard to community meeting requirements for major subdivision applications. So many of you are aware major subdivisions were previously quasi-judicial, now are administratively approved unless they are submitted with a CD rezoning application. So one of the purposes of amending this section is to also require consistency with the subdivision ordinance for community meetings. So stating that they shall not be held on Town of Huntersville Board of Commissioner meeting nights or Planning Board meeting nights. A little bit of a difference here is that the ordinance already states that community meetings shall not be held on regularly scheduled Town of Huntersville Board of Commissioners or Planning Board meeting nights. But as we noticed this year, the meeting dates were altered in response to holidays and elections. So we want to remove the word regularly there. So any scheduled Town of Huntersville Board of Commissioners meetings night or Planning Board meeting night, you would not be allowed to schedule a community meeting for a major subdivision on those nights. So that's one section there. Another is when you have a major subdivision that is also submitted with a CD rezoning. Currently, if you submit that, you have two different timelines for your community meetings. So staff is proposing that if you have a major subdivision that is a part of a CD rezoning package, you're only following one timeline. You would just defer to the CD rezoning timeline, which would require that your community meeting takes place before your public hearing. This would allow more time for the applicant to address staff comments and incorporate feedback from the community before you go to public hearing. And then lastly, if a major subdivision is submitted solely as an administrative review for staff to review, we're proposing that the community meeting take place before the second review cycle is accepted. So staff currently review on review cycles. So you have a certain number of days when staff review and comments are returned back to the applicant. Right now, the timeline is that the community meeting is held within 45 days of submitting your application. And we're proposing to amend this to say that after that, any time between when you first submit and when you want to submit your next review cycle, have your community meeting. The idea is that applicants would have more flexibility of when they schedule their meeting. And then we also want to allow applicants to have a better time frame to incorporate feedback from the community, essentially before they're too far along in their design to incorporate any changes. Any questions with this section?
I've got just, it may be a minor point, but on the rescheduling of the Huntersville board meeting, the commissioner meeting. And I can understand what you're saying, but what happens in the case of where a board meeting is canceled at the last minute, snow, whatever, and they reschedule it the following night, and there's already one of these meetings set up? That's gonna cost the developer, the applicant, some money to reschedule. So I think we've got to be careful that we're not, there ought to be, I don't know, it may not ever happen, but.
If that were to occur, that would not be a scheduled meeting. They'd have to, so that would be.
It would be a scheduled meeting, just delayed for a day or whatever.
But that, let's say we're having our meeting on Tuesday and there's a snowstorm, we can't cancel it and we push it to Wednesday. That Wednesday's not the scheduled meeting. That's a makeup meeting. The scheduled meeting would be Tuesday. Okay. We would interpret that as Wednesday.
So you would allow the applicant to go ahead and have his meeting?
The odds of that happening are slim and none. So,
okay.
But we'll go with that.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
We don't regularly have such weather, but has that ever happened where it's like Tuesday to Wednesday or something like that?
In 20
I don't think so. Was there something that started this in terms of, we got to get this changed and we need to go ahead and do this? Has somebody, I don't, obviously not asking for names, but this has been a problem.
I could say that to the case, it was the Walden Berm case. They moved they told us one day, they changed the date without referring back to us, because again, they don't have to tell us what date they were doing that. They sent out their letters and we're like, hey, this is the night of, the night, because the election, the board, of course, we know this year switched Mondays to Tuesdays. Tuesday was the election, they switched it from Tuesday back to Monday. Now we have a conflict on Mondays. So this was something we were going to do anyways, and then there was a hiccup, and here we are, we're fixing this.
Okay. No, that's good.
Yep.
Scott.
On that note, so the applicant dictates kind of like, this is when I'm going to do it, I'm notifying you, you don't really have any input for the most part?
We try to pay attention to certain things, holidays. We did have one group that wanted to do it on a Friday night, that was St. Patrick's Day. We highly suggested that they didn't do it. Can't stop them, but they did move it to Thursday night. But
That's why I say while we're going through this, do we put a little bit more teeth in it and say it can't be on a scheduled Huntersville Town Commission or a holiday? Do you think it's necessary? Y'all deal with it?
We'll handle it on a case
Okay,
by case basis.
okay.
Most folks are pretty good. That's pretty rare that we run into those situations. Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions with this section?
No.
Okay. Okay, section 3 is with regard to the existing features requirements. So As a part of submitting plans, and this is, I know this is a very long section, and our proposed change is number 5 at the very bottom, at the end. As a part of submitting plan sets, applicants are required to submit an existing features plan. And there are a lot of things that you have to include. Most importantly, for most, I would say, community members, are the environmental features and trees. So right now, when you submit your existing features sheet, you're showing trails, existing trails, cemeteries, your tree canopy, you're showing your swim buffers, streams, et cetera. And we're proposing that applicants also show the proposed limits of disturbance. The reason that we're proposing this is so that staff has a better view of the area that's proposed to be disturbed in relationship to all the existing environmental features, in response to feedback from board members and residents about disturbance outside of the approved limits. Any questions with this section? Yes.
I might just be overlooking where it says this, but the report that comes out of the community meeting,
Oh.
is it the developer that is responsible for submitting that report, or is a staff person at the meeting, and that's where the report is generated from the staff?
So the developer would submit that report.
Okay, and the reason I ask this is because I have gone back and tried to read community meeting notes from prior projects. And they're not that old. They might be 4 or 5 years old. And there was very little information because we also had an audio recording of the community meeting, and it was totally devoid of any of the community's concerns or suggestions or anything like that. And that's why I was just wondering if there would be like full disclosure of what actually was said and done at the meeting.
So we do not require anything close to a verbatim transcript as a part of that written report. However, the ordinance does require that feedback provided from the community is incorporated. So there's supposed to be suggestions provided, questions that are asked, but unfortunately, the structure of the ordinance does not require that staff dictate the format of that meeting. So sometimes the meetings are held in a format where the developer is asking a question and answer where the questions can be very easily documented, and sometimes they're held in like a series of charrettes where whomever is taking notes for the developer doesn't hear all the questions or capture all those questions. And then the ordinance does not allow staff to disapprove the project if the community meeting report doesn't include the full breadth of the feedback from the community. We will provide that feedback, but to my knowledge, we can't disapprove a plan if they don't. So at times, if there are significant comments, we will provide feedback. If we've heard several people say that they would prefer a stub be in a different location, we may make the comment that we heard that during the meeting. Or if several people ask for the construction entrance to be in a different location, we will make those comments, but we can't unfortunately disapprove the plan. So we observe the same thing. Anything I'm missing there?
No, just want to let everybody know that there's no statutory requirement to have community meetings. This is something that the town chose to do above and beyond. So we have limited teeth as to how, how we can dictate those meetings. Again, we do allow the developers to have some creativity, and they're the ones to hold the meeting. Again, like Lauren said, we don't dictate format or how they run those meetings.
Okay, before I get to you, if that's the situation, and obviously there are things here and there that they get left out, and that's not a thing. But when they're significantly different, and there might be concern with a resident or other people about that, how does one go about, or does it matter at that point? You know what I'm saying?
No, I
They
hear you.
report
And
it,
one thing I
or-
think we can do better as a staff is to say, hey, you know, this was, if we do a better job at looking through those things, instead of just taking them and being a pass-through. Hey, you missed some of these significant items that were talked about. Could you please add those in there?
Okay, because there's probably a pretty big one coming up
Oh,
in a
I'm,
couple of weeks.
maybe,
Maybe.
maybe.
Thank you.
I think Brian probably answered my question. I was going to say, is it a possibility, or is it even reasonable to require that developer to have a third party there to take those minutes?
I think that would probably be a little bit out of our purview, because that's additional costs, you know.
That's what I was saying. It sounds like by statute, we're probably outside the bounds a little bit maybe anyway, so, or it could be challenged. That's all. Okay, yep.
Any questions with this section before I move on? So sections 4 and 5 are similar. Section 4 is with regard to the requirements for berms along thoroughfares. The top paragraph is with regard to the vegetation in the 20-foot landscaping buffer along the thoroughfare, and the second part is with regard to the berm design standards. So staff are proposing the removal of the subjective language with regard to vegetation worthy of preservation, and proposing that if there is existing vegetation within that 20-foot buffer, it's required to remain by ordinance when an applicant is submitting a major subdivision for administrative review. Now, this does not prevent applicants from requesting to remove that vegetation. They would just have to do that through the CD rezoning process. So if they want to remove the vegetation there, they can submit, you know, a superior design standard through the CD rezoning process, and the planning board would still have the opportunity to review that, but it would just be a different process. And then the requirements for berms along thoroughfares, the ordinance sets specific standards for the design of berms along thoroughfares, and staff review those standards. So the proposal is to remove the additional step of taking that to planning board for two different parties to review the same standards. Any questions with this section? Yes.
Could you walk us through the town's authority for tree preservation as it relates to this section? What authority is the town relying on for tree preservation in this berm?
Yeah, we have
Statutory authority.
Yes, that's the reason I bring that up. So are you familiar with that, Brian? Okay, all right, so in that, it's House, Session Law 1997-420. And it specifically gives us authority to regulate the planting, removal, and preservation of trees on public and private property within the municipality. But there's an exception. Any ordinance adopted pursuant to this section shall exclude property to be developed for single-family or duplex residential uses. And there is no general authority, we only have specific to rely on, but our ordinance does not exclude single-family residential development. So my question is, are we exceeding our authority with the way this is written, not only here, but throughout the ordinance related to tree preservation, associated with single-family?
We don't dictate on single lots. So if you were to go to build a house on Beatty's Ford Road, we're not getting into the tree statutes with that.
Okay, but
Clear cut.
if you have a subdivision that is single-family residential, the way this reads, you cannot have tree preservation because it's excluded.
We'll have a difference of opinion there. We believe we have the authority to do that. It's part of a major development.
Is if a major development is considered single-family residential?
It is not. You're saying a subdivision versus a single lot, two different things.
I just don't interpret it that way.
We understand, you know.
you know, anyway. I think we're exceeding our authority there, and I think we need to review that very, very closely.
Okay.
Anyway, that's my question.
Any other questions with this section?
Scott Hensley, as a member of the planning board, that looks good to you? Because it's talking about taking that, away from the planning board, that it's unnecessary for the planning board to. Okay. Harrison?
I've got a question on the first part there. So, existing vegetation shall remain, but it has to meet the requirements of the opaque screen. Okay. So, what happens if it doesn't meet the requirements? Then it can be removed and replaced?
No, so what would happen is if you had, for example, in the 20 feet, only 10 feet had vegetation, you would have to add supplementation for the remainder to create the opaque screening.
But if it's weeds growing out there for 20 feet?
Yes, then you would just do supplementation. You would be allowed to do some removal to add, to be able to plant. Because we understand, like underbrush, for example, like just weedy overgrowth doesn't provide
But
that.
that's what I'm saying. I just think this ought to be worded a little bit more that says that it shall remain unless it doesn't meet these, and then it can be replaced or something like that. Because reading this, it just has to remain, period.
We can reword that.
It's just the wording, okay.
And mine was gonna be along the same lines. I'm thinking that if it's a development comes in and it's only going through subdivision and not the CD, and again, you've got a portion of it that this 20 feet just should not remain there, would they have to then go through the CD to disturb that?
So I think that's what the.
I think
yeah.
I'm saying they're asking the same, I just want to.
Yep, we'll reword it so that it does, you don't have to, we're not proposing that you have to go through the CD rezoning process if your existing vegetation doesn't meet the requirement. We just want it, if you have existing vegetation that is contributing towards some screening, we want that to remain. So we can reword it so that if you have, for example, I don't know, like 5 feet of weedy overgrowth, you can remove that because that's not helping, and we don't want you to have to go through the CD rezoning process just to remove 5 feet of.
That's what I wanted to avoid, that we,
Yes.
next year you put somebody in a box because of some vegetation, I'm like, now I gotta go through CD, and even though you
Yes.
don't want them to, they're in a box.
Yes, so the proposal here in removing these situations from going to planning board isn't to like prevent planning board from reviewing, it's to say if you want to go, you want a reduction in your requirement, so you don't want to do the planting, then we want you to go through the CD rezoning process so the boards have a chance to provide input. And we're getting some type of superior design for whatever adjustment you want in your plans. Any other questions here? So section 5 is with regard to BMPs, or as they're currently being called, SCMs, so your storm ponds in urban open space. Current ordinance allows that you can locate your BMPs within urban open space. However, the purpose of urban open space is intended to be a planned and improved space that is accessible and usable. And so staff are proposing that the ordinance is amended. Currently, if a development wants to exceed the 25% cap for locating BMPs in your open space, you can take that to planning board. But locating more than 25% of your BMPs in open space is not really meeting the intent of the open space. Your open space are supposed to be your parks and your greens and your places where people can have recreational opportunities, whether that's passive or active. And locating storm ponds in those areas doesn't allow people to use them. So the proposal is that developments are not allowed to locate their BMPs in more than 25% of the urban open space. And if they would like to exceed that, then they would need to go through that CD rezoning process. Because the idea is that if you want to use more than that, we would like something that is being done in that development that's providing greater design elements for the town and for the residents of that community.
Because people are not supposed to be tromping around in the BMP and enjoying themselves, right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Any questions? Scott?
Just while we're going through this, and I know that, should we put in SCMs in this section? Or is it, no, and again, this is above my pay grade, so I'm,
We're gonna have to do a larger text amendment later, and we'll flip out PMP for SDM then.
Any questions? Any other questions with this section? That is it. Yes. Yes, may staff have a recommendation?
Thank you. So if we're done with questions, they are asking for a recommendation. And for us to have a discussion, we need to have a motion. Kathy?
I make a motion to approve text amendment TA 24-16, an amendment to the zoning ordinance, Article 11.4.3D and Article 7.4.2G, and the subdivision ordinance, Section 6.3203 and Section 6.3001N, regarding community meeting requirements, existing features requirements, and berm requirements.
Do we have a second? Thank you. Joe, seconds. Okay, discussion. Kathy, you were first. Do you have anything you want to say, or? No. Okay.
So are we gonna recommend it as it's written, or are we gonna wait on this rewrite on this one section?
We'd like to keep this moving forward. We can add some stuff about scrub and some underbrush and dead disease dying, typical language that we would use throughout the ordinance.
It's however you feel comfortable with that, so that you'll make that decision with your vote.
I mean, that's more of a
Scott?
it's a procedural question than anything. I mean, I hate to wait a month and come back, or 3 months and come back, whatever it is.
Okay, we can
I was
add
gonna say, we could just add,
language.
we could amend the motion that says additional language shall be provided
Okay,
by the staff
okay.
for section.
So Kathy, you can add that to the motion, but it'd be good to make sure Joe's good with it before you say it, since he seconded it. Okay.
Okay, I'd like to amend my motion to include updating text discussed during meeting regarding scrub.
I believe that was section 4 and 5 specifically.
Specifically, section 4 and 5.
And Joe, we're good? Harrison, you good on that? Okay. Any other discussion on this? Okay. Would we like to call the vote? All in favor of this motion, raise your hand. Okay, we have a unanimous vote, 5-0. And as we have no other business, I need a motion to adjourn. Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Unanimous. Good afternoon, Huntersville.